Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, welcome back to another Fantasy Friday video, and today we're actually going to be taking a look at leather armor. Now I actually talked about this in the last video of me hoping to do a video on this, and well, I guess that time has come. Now, leather armor, now this is something that I think pretty much everyone wants to believe is real, and a lot of people say it doesn't exist. Well, actually, it does exist. Thing is, though, there are stupid ones, and then there's the correct version that I like to see. In fact, what do I mean by stupid? I mean this stupid fantasy crap like this. Oh, God. Oh. That is this crime against history. Oh, give me a minute. On the foremost of history, we have to understand leather armor is real. Thing is, though, there's a hard way to explain it. What do I mean by hard way to explain it? Well, this is a complicated part. Leather armor is real, yes. Problem is, though, that it's very hard to find historical versions in which we only hear about them in stories and what they would have sounded and looked like, especially from those who would have written them down, and of which we actually do see many people in history actually use leather armor. Now, let's go way, way back. Well, how back? All the way to the Bronze Age. In which, let's first start off with Egypt. In fact, Egypt actually uses a form of leather armor like this. Yeah, this is actually crocodile style armor. This was actually stated to have actually been used by, well, Egyptian special forces during this point in time. Now, in doing so, though, it's actually stated these people would be known as the sons of Sebek. So, yeah, if you don't know who Sebek is, I believe it was the one that's supposed to be devouring the heart of the impure, so yeah, that's kind of horrifying. But anyways, we have to understand, though, that the style of the Egyptian style armor was incredibly, by far, a really impressive idea. In fact, this was mainly made out of one full bodysuit of, well, crocodile skin. And in doing so, what they did is when they hunted this down, they then skinned it, and, well, they then actually had the belly of the crocodile taken away, so that way it could be easily just sewn together. And in doing so, now the arms were open and free, and the, well, mouthpiece of where the crocodile is supposed to have its end of its mouth is now made into a cushioned armor shell for your head. So this was actually stated to have actually stopped arrows. It was stated to have stopped blades. The only thing that could probably have killed this guy underneath this armor would probably be an axe, the kćiʁ, or probably a ancient Egyptian style mace or Bronze Age mace, that of which in ancient worlds would have actually been seen. So we have to understand how dangerous this thing probably could have actually faced, and in doing so it could have pretty much faced off against many dangerous weapons. The thing is, though, it could have deflected them. So why is it that when we hear of this armor, why is it not that much heard as, say, well, mostly anything else? Well, that's because you had to be very crazy and stupid enough to actually try and get this armor. In fact, it was very hard to get your hands on. Because in truth, you had to hunt the, well, children of Sebek, which was not the best idea, especially in the ancient world. In fact, it was viewed that if you hunted a crocodile, you were going against the gods, and you had to first get the permission of the priests. And not everyone could afford or manage to get this armor, not because they died, but because mostly the only people that could actually get this armor were that of, well, wealthy people. And this did not include the poor citizens. So in doing so, most of the time citizens would have actually worn pretty much cloth armor like this. However, there is a weird rarity of them wearing a type of leather armor sometime during the late Bronze Age period. We don't know when, but but there is a story of it being a type of layered leather. Now, what does this mean? This weird armor known as layered leather has actually been used from different cultures, actually. In fact, it's actually stated that it was actually being used not just in Egypt, but also in parts of Asia Minor, used by people known as the Samnites, by the Philistines, and as well the Assyrians, who of which did use a type of layered armor. Now, how are you to actually work with this layered armor exactly? That part we still don't know. What we're actually told is what would have actually been happening is that it would have been a strip of leather, and what would happen is this strip would have been just single layered, and it would have been sewn over another layer, of which would have been doubled in height. And in doing so, it would just keep doing the same and the same until you got up to the chest, and in which most of the time this layered armor design in such as Asia Minor would have actually been sleeveless. And as well, if now you understand, in the ancient world, most of the time, most armor was sleeveless in variety. However, that's the thing. This armor was very big out there. However, it's actually stated that the Assyrians actually used laminar style leather armor rather than use the, well, Philistine or early Asia Minor type of layered leather. Now, that part I can understand why. Now, in truth though, it would actually take a lot more time to probably make either one, but I kind of would have to go with the laminar best for one major reason. It was used a lot longer for a longer amount of time, and plus it kind of did look less stupid than well, the layered leather, which, if none of you understand of how stupid this would look, just imagine this. You have, say, like one layer of leather and then it's doubled. Here's the thing. Your belly is going to be looking like a big bloated pumpkin by the time you probably get it done. So you see my point. But in truth, though, we can also see on some historical finds, such as the kidney belt, of which was worn by ancient people, such as the gladiators, or some historians even state the poorer foot soldiers of history, such as that of being in the stories of David and Goliath. In fact, it's actually stated that many Hebrews actually did wear a kidney belt mainly for protection rather than any other armor. In fact, it was lighter, it was more effective enough to keep them well, sustained. However, there is even the armor that was actually known to have been used by the sea people, and as well, the Hittites. And this would have actually been what they called the kćiʁ. Don't laugh at that. That's actually what they called it for some weird reason. I don't know what the hell that actually meant. And in which, this was an ancient translation from Egyptian, this is actually an ancient Egyptian meaning of it, of which is stated to have actually been a wrapped leather. Now, this is actually kind of a weird look, but it does look really impressive. In fact, it looks like a cloth-like leather. And in doing so, that's what it was. They actually took massive straps of leather, and what happened is they just had it hanging. But instead of having it hanging, what they did is they folded it in and they just tied it together with more leather, making it into this resistant type of body armor, that of which was perfect enough to stop a thrust and a cutting design. However, the leather armor that we think of the Hittites and Sea People using quickly disappeared over time, in which we could see why, because this is the Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age, as we know everything about, it collapsed. And when it collapsed, so did leather armor entirely. But that also brings me to another form with the Greeks, of which actually did wear leather armor somewhat. However, not as much as their ancient worlds of Asia Minor and such. What they would have actually worn would have been, well, the Greek lanothorax, but, well, instead of it just being cloth, what they would have been done, it would have been a sandwich of layers, such as first it's leather, then it's cloth, leather, cloth, leather, cloth, and in doing so it would have been glued together. However, if you were rich enough, you could actually afford just the leather, and in doing so it was strong enough and durable enough to stop arrows effectively. Now, let's then move further westward into the Celts, in which the Celts actually were known to have actually worn a type of leather buff coat. In fact, it's actually stated the Romans and Greeks actually labeled the Celts of wearing a light type of equipment of leather, that of which was stated to have actually stopped arrows in mid-flight as soon as they had managed to impact the warrior. And yet, he could still come at them with ferocious fury and slaughter another 10 men before he was slain. Now, that gives us a good example on this type of armor. In truth, it was mostly made out of leather during the early eras in history during the ancient Hallstatt culture. However, over time, it would have actually then evolved and actually adopted a form of padding armor underneath. In other words, the outer layer would have been like a buff coat layer. The inner layer would have mostly just been made out of, well, cloth. And in which this would have been a good combination to stop the blows of a weapon. And as we can see in this image, we actually see from this little figurine, we actually see that little cloth, we actually see that type of, well, armor that he's wearing. It's, well, not normal. It's actually just a buff coat. That's all it is. In which this was light enough and effective enough that of which it was actually impressive to actually still being used. Now, the thing is, the Celts actually kept using this armor a lot because it was a lot cheaper than, well, getting a full suit of plate armor, and of which it was a lot lighter. So just imagine that. Which would you rather go with? Light armor that was still effective enough as bronze plate, and which was half the price, and as well as 1/3 of the weight. So, which would you rather choose? That's my point. Now, in doing so, though, we can actually see why this armor was being used in history books. Now, another type of way I can actually understand this is actually to see why they kept using it. In fact, the Celts were stated to have actually used this armor up until it's, well, until it was later on replaced by a different set of armor entirely, especially from the Welsh, the Scots, and including the Irish and the Picts, who were the last Celtic people to have actually used it in the ancient world. However, the Welsh then switched to a new set of armor randomly quickly than the other Celtic tribes, so yeah. Now, let's now move towards the Far East, especially towards the steppe people of Eurasia, such as the Mongols, the Cumans, and the Huns, who of which would have actually worn leather laminar, and of which, if now you understand, leather laminar is the biggest thing out there, that of which would have actually been worn as leather armor. Now, what did it actually do? Why would they actually mainly have gone with this? Well, it's kind of obvious. Leather laminar was different, comprised to the other forms in which other cultures would have used, and of which it was actually used a lot longer. And now, we actually do see leather laminar being used in a video game known as Kingdom Come Deliverance, especially by the Cumans, which would have worn this steppe people armor. And effectively, it could have actually stopped arrows. Now, the thing is, the laminar was actually perfect for the steppe people for one major reason. Why? Kind of obvious. If you're riding a horse, guess what? You're pretty much actually just going to have to wear a lighter armor. And that's what the steppe people did. They wore light armor. And that's what laminar was. It was light, but yet effective armor. Now, they wouldn't have just worn leather laminar. They would have also worn, underneath this, a leather design style of Eastern buff coat. Now, however, the Mongols had their own version comprised to the other cultures, of which were slightly different in variations and designs. So We don't know what the Huns would have might have worn, but we do get a good example of what this would have actually looked like. And as well, we can actually see the Chinese and parts of Korea actually adopt from the Mongols and then design their own version of laminar. In fact, they even made a full suit of leather laminar. Historians actually describe this as a unstoppable type of armor, that of which was able to make the guy look like a porcupine, so to speak, and that's saying something. Now, this is actually a find that was actually discovered in China, and actually the one on the bottom is supposed to be the historical one that was designed and found, while the top one layer is actually the recreation of it, which actually that's a good example of leather armor at its finest, and in which leather armor was cheaper than steel. In fact, now you don't understand how cheap. Here's the thing. If one could actually manage to hunt down a boar, a bear, or something out there, he could pretty much just make an entire suit or type of leather laminar body armor out of this type of, well, chunk of meat, if you could say, and in which it provides good armor. Now, many of you might start saying, but that doesn't happen. How does this work? Well, in truth, the leather laminar has been used throughout many times in history. In fact, the last time it was ever used was by the Mongols, and by the time of the end of the Mongol Caliphate Empire of its time, in which even the Middle East, actually during the time of the Caliphates of Islam, actually did also use leather laminar. The same can be said about the Persians, the Samnites, and so on. And in doing so, they actually did use a form of leather armor. However, that's the thing. Leather laminar was pretty much being used out there for people who were using, well, horses mainly, especially for riding. Now, it's also been stated that medieval knights, especially early medieval Norman knights, actually might have actually worn a form of leather leg armor, especially, instead of wearing leather form of mail. So that does give us a good example. Problem is, we don't know if that's true or not. However, let's go even further in history into the buff coat by the time of the very late medieval period and the Renaissance. Especially if none of y'all know what a buff coat like this is, here's the thing. In truth, yes, this is actually supposed to be worn underneath the plate armor. You don't wear this over the plate, in which I find this very idiotic from Game of Thrones when they say that the leather is placed over the plate, which that does not make any sense. I could probably see that working with a coat of plates or a brigandine, but no, not with regular breastplate, no. So yeah, this would actually be a good way to explain it. In fact, this would have been the poor man's full suit of armor, in which most of the time, and none of you understand, in history books, most foot soldiers could only afford, say, the breastplate and the helmet, or just the breastplate in general. And the rest of the body would actually just have the, well, buff coat, keeping it resistant enough from the blows and shocks of a sword. In fact, cavalry sabers were said to have glanced off a buff coat, which I have a buff coat here at the at my place to actually, we might actually do an armor test on that probably soon, because I want to actually test that theory out and see if that's true or not, because I want to say yes, it might, because buff coats are incredibly resistant to a cut or a stab. Problem is, with enough force from a weapon, you can actually break the body underneath its armor, in which buff coats were not gambesons. They were very, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, yeah, I had to say crappy when it comes to padded armor. So that's saying something. Now, in truth, though, leather armor was, I guess you could also count the vambrace or a bracer or arm bracer used by medieval archers as a type of form of leather armor if you want. I wouldn't go that far because technically it's just to protect the wrist from the impact of the string from the bow. So yeah, we got to think that one through though. But as well, many times over, leather armor was worn throughout many cultures. In fact, there is a number, and I mean a number of ancient people out there that which would have worn a form of leather armor in general. However, some historians even state there might have been a scale version of leather armor. I don't know if that's true or not because there is no information. However, we actually do also get some weird tales of ancient people from tribal Africa or ancient tribal people from America using the skins of humans as armor, which I get that information from the ancient Aztec history, which actually is stated that the Aztec priests had actually flayed the princess alive of another tribe, which caused the Aztecs to then be kicked out of an area and as well hunted down for most of their life and generation. However, that's my point though. We don't ever hear it being used as body armor, so I don't have to count that as armor. But the thing is, there is a multiple amount of leather armor in history, that of which was able to stop said weapons. However, it was the invention of gunpowder that pretty much got rid of leather. And that says something. Now, if you don't know what also with the late European buff coat was, the leather, this was actually a type of, well, good armor. Thing is though, people would have actually worn this every day. Literally, it would have been worn on the said person. And the only time they would have actually added the full sleeves is if we were going to go to battle. In other words, in fact, most of the time, this was just a sleeveless vest that you would normally see every day. Until you would go to battle, then it says donning on the full sleeves. So, yeah. But still, though, this leather armor was incredibly resistant to stop weapons. So, my biggest question is, why is it that we're using some stupid armor that which does not make any sense? Because look at this. This is from a Viking series, and this is this shit. There's no meaning for it at all. I don't even know why they made this. And then there's this weird fantasy armor that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't look like it's going to protect anybody. You see my point. There is a right way to do it, and then there's the wrong way to do it. Now, they could have, with Vikings, they could have probably put, say, leather, laminar in the entire fray to make it easier. But in truth, not every Viking would have worn leather. Or hardly any would have actually worn leather. Most of the time, they would have actually worn jerkins, in fact, which were still resistant enough, but were made out of cloth. But you see my point. Leather was extremely massive produced type of armor, in which it was used throughout many cultures. Problem is, it depended on the culture. In fact, it depended on the time period, the location. It depended on the animal you used to, well, make the armor, and if you had enough. In fact, some historians actually state that when it came to starting armor, especially leather, what they did is that sometimes they would actually added first a first layer of leather or cloth, then they would have actually then sewn on leather plate scales. Now, this is actually really cool because just imagine this, that you're technically just starting this from your cloth, say my t-shirt right here is the cloth. And what I'm doing is I'm sewing each plate in and such of a leather piece, making it more resistant. But in truth, there is a big rarity of historical finds, which I can see why. Now, most of the time, though, we do find some historical finds of leather armor out there. Problem is, they're very rare. Most of the time, if it's going to be from the medieval period, or very early medieval period to be precise, we can actually find that, say, in, well, Scandinavia, or in the extreme hot climate of parts of Asia, or including even the Middle East of Asia Minor. So, in truth, though, we have to discover it in a very diverse area. But this is my point out there that there is a huge difference between real and fake leather armor. And in truth, I do know one thing. I rather prefer the real version rather more than the fake version that doesn't make any sense by its look. So, yeah. Anyways, guys, hopefully you liked this Fantasy Friday video as much as I did. In which, if y'all want me to talk about anything other in Fantasy Friday, please let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe to help the channel grow and as well become part of the order. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Have a great day. Also, check out our Facebook, so that way y'all can stay up tuned and such of new videos that are going to come up. Anyways, guys, see y'all later.